Good evening and welcome to the City of Helena Administrative Meeting, December 15, 2020, 4 p.m. This meeting is called to order. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary during the meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
Apologies, Mr. Mayor, I was trying to unmute myself. City Attorney Joden.
Here.
City Manager Harlow Schulk. Here. Commissioner Halliday.
Here.
Commissioner Dean.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Here.
And Mayor Collins.
Here. Commission comments? Is there any comments or discussion from the commission? Do you have any recommendations from HCC? Do we have a representative, Madam Clerk? City Manager's report. Oh,
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. I was a little slow.
Ms. Freelander, you have the floor.
Can you all hear me?
Yes,
Thank you,
we
Mr.
can.
Mayor. Hi, yes. Again, thank you for having us. Good afternoon, evening to the city commissioners and Mr. Mayor and all the others on the call here. The HCC would like to congratulate all the newcoming commissioners if they're here, and give a thank you for the outgoing commissioners and to the current for your continued service to our community. It's hard because you can't see me, but I can see you. But I'm smiling and my hand's going. So my name is Heidi Friedlander. I represent the 6th district. And we are looking forward to working together for the betterment of all of our citizens' lives. We just wanted to say that you are welcome, all of you are welcome to attend our meetings are on the last Wednesday of the month. And our meetings in Zoom are located on our website, and I can put that in the chat. And it includes all of our info for our respective districts and how to contact us and how, if you'd like for your friends or your neighbors to reach out to us as you see fit, or your constituents for us, feel free to refer them to us. Again, my district is the 6th district. As a lot of my neighbors say, it is called the 6th ward. And some of them prefer to be called 6th ward rats. I'm not calling them rats. They like to be called rats. So to piggyback and to kudos to our mayor's very hard work with the snow removal. And I also see on our the agenda today, and to kudos to our dedicated city removal employees, some of the issues that we have that we will be bringing to the table were some of the lighting districts. So thank you. And that will help with the snow removal that we have going on, so that now there's ice there. And with the new lighting districts, for the safety of our citizens, they can see a little bit better. And then also as you will, a deterrent for any temptations in the dark hours. So I've spoke with a lot of neighbors, and we're ready. We're moving forward. Hopefully with Northwest Energy, we have some appointments set up for that, and looking forward to what else the city has to say about that, and what commissioners and mayor will have to say about that. And again, good for the safety, because I'm a nurse. So I'm always looking out for that. Now we have a couple minutes just to share with you, if you will, about, and we're just, our basic minutes that we have right now that from our last meeting are just on outreach and communication. And we are looking forward to working together with all of you for more outreach. A lot of us have the Helena app on our phones right now. That's awesome. Thank you for that and all that work on that. And trying to get out to our neighborhoods and get more connection as well. Like to say thank you for the work on the TIF and all of that for our railroad district in Helena. Like to stick that in there to advocate for my district. So thank you for that very much. Looking forward to that. And I think that's pretty much it. Trying to get more media presence for our council and our citizens. So thank you again and looking forward to a new year, and thanks for all your dedication for the last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Freelander. Any comments for HCC or questions? Okay. City Manager's report.
Hi there. Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor. Quickly, a couple of items on this agenda need to be addressed. Apologies right out front, and noting that the lighting district was something that the HCC wanted to discuss or hear more about. That item should not be on this agenda. It is actually planned for a January item, and it should be removed, and we will plan to bring it back in January. Apologies. You will notice that the item itself looked a little strange in your packet, and that's because it wasn't ready. So apologies on that one. Also want to make sure and move the guest presentation from Joe Cohenauer on the watershed preservation in the wildland urban interface, the WUI. Move it up to item 4A. So again, 6A, remove special lighting improvement lighting districts, and move item 4B above 4A. Before I move on to introduce Mr. Cohenauer and ask your help in introducing him, I wanted to provide a couple of items of update to you as well. First, wanted to let you know that I was appointed to the board of the League of Cities and Towns, and we'll share information back as I hear it. In that, we'll begin that service in January. This returns the City of Helena to that important board. The agenda for our commission training coming up in January, Danae and I have been talking through, and we also have been talking through a method to improve the way in which you all can add an item through the agenda to the agenda. So we'll present during that commission training not only an update at the end for you all, and I'll also ask Danae if she wants to share her screen and share the agenda from last time that you all had. But the proposal is to move forward with that, and then at the end there bring in the directors to do just a general intro and a handout, share a handout to them, and then also talk at that time with you all about a strategic planning session. So just wanted to make sure to close that loop since it's coming up quickly in January 6th. I know that, so sorry, Danae, you're there. I'm not sure if the commission would like to see that really quickly, but it's just the same one as last time. Yeah, I apologize, Madam Manager and Commissioners. I had it pulled up and then I lost it, and so I'm trying to pull it up again real quick for you.
If there's any changes, maybe we just ask the commission for anything they would like added or removed from that, and maybe now, or we can talk about it. It's just that it comes up so quickly on the 6th. I know it's awkward to have this conversation in space, but I know I want to make sure that we have you all before we move to setting an agenda with you.
Yeah, give me just a moment.
No worries, I'll keep moving. So while we do that, I do have another item. I wanted to let you know that I am looking with the team at doing a one-time stipend for our staff in these next couple of weeks. The reason being, as you know, we are seeing a consistent low turn in getting new workforce in, and there's a real impact of workload onto our staff. And consistently, we are down 25% of our workforce and have been since July. In talking with the department heads, this double duty is very much difficult, and it has not resulted in an impact to the services we're providing, which is great news. But it's also really important that we thank the team. So the stipend that I'm planning to distribute is with one-time excess reserve. And this is not a retention tool. Again, this is a thank you. And it is one time from our excess reserves and is a thank you. The directors have waived their access to the stipend, and doing so in an effort to ensure that the team in the ranks really know how much we appreciate it and know that they're doing everything they can to ensure that the services to the city are maintained with such a huge impact to not only that volume of staff that we have, but the impact of COVID. So the second part of that is recommending that the commission, if you all agree, also waive the one-time stipend so that all the electeds also waive that so that the dollars go to those staffers too. So what does it look like? The stipend itself is a full-time employee who works for the city is looking at a $1,500 bonus. Stipend. It is a stipend that will help, that will be taxed. Anyone that is on part-time, seasonal, or temporary who's worked greater than or equal to 425 hours will receive a prorated stipend. And the lowest amount that someone could receive is $442. So the total contribution is to this from our excess reserves is around $590. And again, this is a thank you to our staff. And as you know, the budget was adopted. These excess reserves are adopted in that
I'm
budget.
assuming, Madam Manager, I'm assuming
Yes.
you're saying 500,000, not
590,000.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
You said $590, so.
Sorry about that. $590,000. Thank you. These dollars would come from excess reserves, and they are currently within the budget authority. I wanted to make you aware of it before, and if there was any large alarm or concern, I wanted to make sure that we talk about it first. So, Danae, if you're ready, and then we can come back perhaps to it, the stipend at the end after Danae shares her screen.
Sure. Thank you, City Manager, Commissioners. Some of you will recognize this from February 18th, 2020, when we did the last commission orientation. We're proposing, the City Manager's office and myself, that we go ahead and use this as a blueprint for the upcoming City Commission orientation. The incoming commissioners, Commissioner-elect Fever and Reed, both been provided with a copy of this agenda as well, so that they can offer thoughts when it's available or appropriate for them. I think what we were hoping to do was get some feedback from all of you here at the meeting to see if you have any addendums or changes or comfortable with moving forward as we did in 2020. I'll take any questions or comments that you have now.
Madam Clerk, did you say you wanted information from us now from this agenda you just put forth?
You have all seen this before, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's really just an opportunity, if you have any thoughts now. I think what the city manager was proposing earlier was that we had intended on possibly doing the orientation due to scheduling conflicts all the way out in February, because that was the earliest time we would have available. As it turns out, the MSU Local Government Center did have an opening come up on January 6th, and since there'll be some fairly important items early on in the commission agendas in January, we thought it appropriate to take that early opportunity on the 6th if it was available. So to expedite things, we were hoping to have you all look at this. This is something that I think I broached with you in previous, that you may have some thoughts here you wanted to discuss as a group.
Is it possible to enlarging it?
Yep, certainly.
Thank you. There you go. Do you want to start from the top?
Yeah, so call to order as always. And then the first sequence on the agenda was the MSU Local Government Center presentation. I believe, we called it Government 101 with Dan Clark, and that was well received by the commission at the time. And I believe all of you were interested in having him come back and do that as well. The city attorney had an orientation presentation that he had done previously, and we thought that we would go ahead and have him do that again if that proves to be something you'd like to review with him. And then the Montana League Cities and Towns, if we could get a representative to come and introduce themselves to all of you. The final component of the agenda, as you can see, would be the city department structure. The city manager and I have been discussing what that would look like in actuality. This is sort of open-ended based upon what your discussions would be with the city manager, what you'd like to see about the department or the organization and from department heads.
I don't have a problem with that, Madam Clerk. Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I like this. I think it worked well. Just a couple things of note on the city attorney's presentation. If on 5B, we could maybe tailor more of the time to like subdivision reviews and understanding those processes, since obviously those are going to be coming up first. And I think the presentation that Thomas had given before, I think was really helpful and would be good during that orientation. The other one on 7A, it might be worthwhile too, within that, to have included the materials of the work plan and just kind of a brief overview of where we are with our strategic outcomes, to kind of, set the stage for the year. I think that would be a good primer as to what items we actually have, on the docket coming up.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So is Dan just sticking around for his part, or will he be there for the entire session?
It's my understanding, Commissioner Logan, that Mr. Clark is planning on being there for the entirety.
Okay, thank you.
I can certainly confirm that with him, but so far in our discussions, there's been no hint that he would be exiting early. I believe he's making himself available at your leisure.
Thanks.
Okay, so Madam Clerk, I think it's okay. I think we can live with this.
Okay, and I do know that at least one of the commissioners-elect is on the meeting this evening, and I would welcome his thoughts either in written form or in public comment when the time comes.
Thank you. Manager Hollishaw.
Thanks, Mayor. So circling back to the stipend, I wanted to make sure and answer any questions that you might have based on the information I shared. And then we can move to the next items after that, which would be the presentation on the wildland urban interface in 10 Mile.
Comments or questions for Manager Hollishaw?
Mayor, I just had one quick question on the stipend.
Go ahead.
Can you just lay out where in the budget would this then be reflected? I know you mentioned that you're using reserve. Would this be coming out of, and I think in the past, it's come out of sort of the city manager's discretionary funds. Is that where it's located, or?
Thank you. No, I also see Director Danielson is on. These are excess reserves within each of the fund. We already have our policy reserves. These are excess reserves beyond the policy reserves, so established for each. So, Sheila, want to share anything further?
Thank you, City Manager Harlow-Schock and Commissioner Laughlin, Mayor, and other commissioners. Yes, these are through, it's primarily being funded through vacancy savings that we've had year to date. Just looking at some numbers through the end of November, the general fund has an estimated savings right now of vacancies in about $445,000. If I look at all the other funds and combined, we're almost $1 million under what we budgeted just for personnel services. So this stipend is using the savings from those vacancies to be able to fund it, and does not increase appropriations.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, I would be supportive of this. I don't know if the public necessarily realizes how much work our staff has been doing over the last year. You know, and during a pandemic, it has been kind of nonstop. So I am super appreciative of their work, and folks who work in local government and state government rarely get things like Christmas bonuses or anything like that. So I think this is a nice opportunity to utilize those excess reserves.
Did you say state government? I don't know about that. But do we have any other comments or questions for Manager Hollishaw or Director Danielson? Well, I want to also say, you know, this is a good way to say thank you to our employees for all they've done. And I was one of those that were tooting the horn, you know, because we had a pretty difficult COVID season, and to have for us, a community, to have gone through that without losing services, it meant a lot. And so I thank them for their dedication and hard work during the crisis. And I think it's well deserved. Director Danielson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also wanted to indicate to the commission that regardless of the vacancies in our current fiscal budget, the reserves that we have are enough to cover this stipend as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other final comments? Manager Hollishaw, are you done?
Yes, thank you. I will now turn it over to Mr. Konar, but I apologize. I do have one more item. I want to make sure to underscore my thanks and support to you all for the team and the work they've been doing. So thank you. Okay, so I would like to introduce to you Mr. Konar. He has been a part of the Helena community. He and his influences in particular in the watershed project and its influence on the wildland urban interface. And I know there was a group within the city manager's office previously that had been meeting and discussing the impacts of the watershed to the watershed and the 10 Mile area, and wanted to make sure and get this on the agenda for you all again. Mr. Kohenauer, it's all yours. And I believe you can share your screen.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Joe Kohenauer. I actually chair your 10 Mile South Helena Forest Collaborative, and we were formed several years ago to look at the forest plan that the forest was proposing on the 61,000 acres of forest that is directly south of Helena. That 61,000 acres also encompasses 41,000 acres of your watershed. So it is a very important project to the city of Helena. I have a presentation, and city manager asked me to be brief, and it's about a 13-minute slideshow. It kind of goes over the history of watersheds and how they became, well, more important and came on the front page of the newspapers. And so let me share my screen and I will show you my presentation. So thank you, everybody. And if you do have questions, just chime up and ask me as we go through here, or you can just hold your questions to the end. This is kind of an important kind of talking about drinking water source of the United States. Let's talk about the big picture. First of all, 60%, about 60% of America's cities relies on lakes, rivers, and streams for their water. 39% or about 40% rely on groundwater, underground sources, and Montana follows right along with that. Billings, Great Falls sources their water from their major rivers adjacent to them. Missoula, Kalispell draws their water from the big wells underneath them. And of course, Butte, Bozeman, and Missoula, or Butte, Bozeman, and Helena rely on watersheds within the forest. And so I'm going to talk predominantly about Bozeman and Helena. But first, we want to talk about how we got there and how this came to be part of our discussion. Well, they had a big fire back in Colorado. It's called the Hayman Fire in 2002. And the importance of the Hayman Fire is it was a catalyst for this discussion. And what it did is it brought light to how important these watersheds within the forest complex are to basically urbanites. And most urban people don't think about where their water comes from. Kind of like they think milk comes from Safeway. Well, it doesn't. It comes from the cows. And so the Hayman Fire affected about 1.3 or 1.2 million customers within the Denver watershed area. And so the Hayman Fire, 138,000 acre fire, huge complex of fire, and it was the biggest one in the state at that time. And then the next season, they got heavy rains. They thought the fire was so huge in such a large area that it actually affected the water system and brought down heavy fire. Well, if you know anything about fire, it caused hydrophobic soils, which means that it was high enough in carbon that the water didn't get soaked in. So it increased the sediment loads within those streams in that watershed, that Denver watershed, about 250% over natural conditions. That sediment flowed downstream into the Cheeseman and Strontius Springs reservoirs, which pretty much plugged them. So subsequently, Denver Water, the Forest Service, and everybody sprung into action, spent a ton of money, and they're still spending money on this, even though this was what 19 years ago. They've spent almost $500 million trying to fix this watershed after this big fire. And so I look at the city of Butte, I look at the city of Bozeman, and I look at the city of Helena. They can't afford that. It's better to be proactive and go after these systems before they have these big catastrophic fires within the area. So this is that big orange area there in the middle of your screen is the footprint of the Hayman Fire. And you can see the Cheeseman Reservoir kind of surrounded that whole reservoir, and further down from that was the Strontius Springs Reservoir. Well, this fire happened in 2002, and you can see the little fires that happened subsequently. Well, this year, the Strontius Springs Reservoir, they're doing a $30 million dredging project into that. And so this is what the Cheeseman Reservoir looks like. About 8,500 acres are surrounding that. Of the 8,500 acres surrounding that, which the forest or the city owns, 7,500 acres of that burned. And just imagine what your guys' reservoir, the Scott and the Chessman Reservoir, looked like if that burned. So the city immediately sent all of their guys, their street guys up there. And what they did is they erected sediment traps with straw bales and trash racks into those areas. And you can see the straw bales there. And so this is one of the streams that feeds into the reservoir there. And you can see the sediment load that it brought it down. And it got so bad and sometimes that they had to dredge out those streams, those naturally occurring streams. This is one of the temporary dams that they set up. That brown stuff on the left is sediment that came down, washed down, and backfilled that dam. This is a picture from 2010, which is 8 years after the fire, of one of the workers up there after the sediment came down into the Cheeseman Reservoir. And here's the workers in 2015 replanting seedlings in that area. They spent about $4 million over 2 years replanting the seedlings in just in those 7,500 acres surrounding that reservoir. And this is a picture that just shocked me. This is the sun on one of the dry coulees that come down into the reservoir. So let's flash over to Bozeman. Bozeman's is in the same predicament you guys. They have a large water. They get their water from basically a couple of creeks that flow in from the south. Bozeman, as you know, Bozeman's the fastest growing city. They're adding about 5 new residents per day. A third of their water goes going to the lawns, and during the summertime, that proportion goes to half. They figure they'll outgrow their water supply by 2030. So they just spent $8.1 million on a treatment plant and another $8 million on a storage facility. So this is the Bozeman water supply. If you look at those 2 creeks on the lower right, that supplies about 80% of the water that flows into Bozeman. And you can see the rest of the valley there. This is a caricature of that same picture. It's just a little bit better to see. Halite Canyon and Mystic Lake and Bozeman Creek and Kirk Hill. So this is land use from 53 to 2010. If you guys know anything about Bozeman, that in 2010, I bet you everything between Bozeman and Belgrade there is all brown now. I don't think there's any agricultural use left there. So Halite Canyon, of course, like our Rimini, is a huge recreation area. Thousands of people visit it, and so it has a lot of heartstring tied to that canyon versus just being a water supply watershed. So in 2005, Bozeman Municipal Watersheds Fuel Reduction Project was enacted by the Forest Service, the Watershed Council, and the city. They had modeling that showed that a large wildfire in the Bozeman Municipal Watershed would increase sediment by at least 250% over natural conditions. We saw that number before down in the Hayman fire. So their goal was to protect the water supply and the wildland urban interface. They started the NEPA process in 2005, and now it's 2010. They signed their record of decision 10 years ago. Of course, it was litigated in 2012 by the Alliance for Wild Rockies and Native Ecosystem Council, settled in 2020, showing no significant change in the project. If you actually read that decision, it's actually a case-setting decision if you ever go back and read that. Their project covers 50,000 acres, but it only does field treatments on 4,700 acres. And it's basically just at the head of those canyons. Prescribed burn, mechanical and hand treatments, commercial thinning, and some road constructions. So this is the water intake. If you look on the upper part of that slide, if you look back at that map I showed you, you can see the Bozeman Creek and the Halite Creek coming down, their water intake structure. The checker area and the striped area is their treatments. You can actually see this a little bit better. This is alternative 6. So they went through 6 alternatives on the field treatments that in that area. And so this year, Remember what year I told you that they did that in 2005? So this year is the first year that they're actually doing work on that. They're doing it on a Kirk Hill. And so that's how slow that process is. And they're actually having people protest it right now. They were in front of on Monday, they were in front of the Forest Service building, protest work on around that Kirk Hill. So let's get to Helena. Population 39,000, as you know. Sources of water from 10 Mile Creek, about 78 million gallons a day. And in the summertime, from the Missouri River. The Chessman Reservoir receives water from 4.8 miles of flume. And that flume, 2.1 miles on its private, 2.7 miles on national forest. And so you guys received a grant, $312,000 and $104,000 of your own, and went onto that private land, removed the dead trees, and did a bunch of fuel mitigations. They created buffer zones, 150 feet above, 300 to 350 feet below. Average cost was about $4,000 an acre. So the City of Helena enacted a project, established the 10 Mile Watershed Collaborative Project in 2008. They had a diverse set of members. They only looked at that 2.7 miles of national forest land adjacent to the flume. They basically had a blank slate. They developed a plan, had a record of decision. Of course, it was litigated. The people that litigated saw the project's an excuse just to clear cut versus a land restoration project. And so this is what the project looked like. Basically, it only enacted 490 acres adjacent to that flume on that 2.7 miles. Not a lot of work, but the judge pretty much dismissed everything. So this is what your diversions look like. Those little squares with the circles in there, that's your 5 diversions that they talk about. This is the flume right here that goes from Banner Creek into Chessman Reservoir. And like I said, about a little over half of that is on Forest Service. And this is one of your diversions within the forest. That is what the flume looks like. The flume is actually wood. It can be metal lined, and some of it is just a ditch, basically. This is your watershed. So your water treatment plant is here. This green line going up circles. There's Chessman Reservoir, circles around over the Continental Divide and back down the Continental Divide, back down to your fuel treatment plant or water treatment plant there. So this Red Mountain Flume Chessman Reservoir project is right here in the middle. Helen is on your upper right. That's just for your reference. So this is how important that water is. This is your guys' water use from 1961 to 1990. As you can see, December it's pretty low. Then that April, May, June, and July into August, how big that water usage is. That's how important that water system, that water is to the City of Helena. That is Rim and I looking down. This is above the flume in part of the project. So this gives you kind of a topographic look here. Lower left, it says flume starts here, and that flume works its way around, all the way around over to Chessman Reservoir to your right. It kind of gives you an idea. And there's the water as it enters into the Chessman Reservoir. And you look up at the forest there and look at the dead trees. And this is looking back, and that's even worse with the dead trees there. And if you get into a fire. So this is a fuel treatment area above the flume. They leave some of the woody debris, and then they mostly clear it out. One of the important things is that when you do one of these projects, you have to go back about every 10 years and pick some of those trees out. You can see that coming back. That's actually Doug fir that is coming back amongst that alpine firs. So as soon as the ink cleared on that project, the Forest Service and the city started another project over those 61,000 acres I was just talking about. You guys had a resolution and started the 10 Mile South Helena Restoration Collaborative Committee in 2014. 11 members. We met over 19 times over 15 months and forwarded 36 recommendations. We operated by consensus. Our goal was to increase the protection of course, the Helena City water supply and better firefighter safety. Once we formed, the U.S. Forest Service released a draft environmental EIS to us. There's 3 basically alternatives, including logging, thinning, prescribed fire. Basically, the first one was status quo, and it got more and more and more intense on what they were going to do. They wanted to create a mosaic of age of forest and open areas to reflect historic times. So this is your 10 Mile South Helena project area. And right in the middle is that the Lazy Man and the Jericho. Right down the middle of the Jericho is the Continental Divide. So they wanted a landscape level approach. Dr. Mark Finney, who's the foremost fire ecologist in the world, says for projects to be effective, you must focus on 20 to 40% of the landscape to impact fire behavior. And that's what we wanted to do. The treatments on the 10 Mile South Helena affected about 24% of the landscape. But he said logging alone does not reduce fuels and affect behavior, particularly when the wildfires burn under hot, dry, and windy conditions. Prescribed fire must be used irrespective of logging to mitigate wildfires in extreme conditions. Basically, what you do is you log it to get rid of the heavy coarse fuels, and then you use prescribed fire to get rid of all the fine fires. And that's what usually carries those wildfires, is those fine woody, leaves and small branches and stuff. Of course, you have to look at also the defensible space, or what Dr. Jack Cohn, who's another fire ecologist, what he called home ignition zones. And that is the area around one of your houses. Do you have firewood? Do you have a wooden deck? What is your shingles made out of? You have to look at the whole totality of the picture. And so when they finally signed a record of decision, it affected 11,650 acres of mechanical. The veg treatments was 17,595. And of course, they looked at harvest, slashing, prescribed fire, pre-commercial thinning, low severity fire. I mean, they looked at the whole gamut of mitigations that they possibly could do. And plus watershed improvements, not only for you guys, but for the ecological system. Elevate and move roads to restore the wetlands, route stabilization, install 17 core culverts to upgrade for floodplain. So this is what the veg treatments look like. So that give you a reference, of course, Helen is up here on the upper right. Chessman Reservoir is that blue right in the middle. These orange lines is pretty unique to the Forest Service, to this project. These actually, you can see they surround private property, and these are called buffer zones. And what they did is propose around all the private around there, that people could go in there and actually go onto the forest and actually do fuel mitigations on the forest, which is unique. They usually don't allow that. And of course, you can see this is the project area here, 2.78 miles of the flume. And then you can see the flume, the 2.1 miles here that they've already you guys mitigated. Of course, they were litigated. Helen hunters, anglers, their concern was the use of heavy equipment with the inventoried roadless areas. Alliance for Wild Rockies and Native Ecosystem, they pretty much contested the whole project as they usually do. In the meantime, the Forest Service agreed not to use heavy equipment with the inventoried roadless areas. In 2020, Helena anglers prevailed. And basically the judge said the agency didn't fully represent the road's development. Basically what the Forest Service did is, within all the maps that I showed you, if they weren't using the road anymore, they'd put a gate on it, or they'd Kelly hump it, which is just a mound of dirt, and then they take it off their system. Well, the judge pretty much said it's still a road. Even though you don't use it anymore, it's still a road. Unless you absolutely take it and obliterate it, it's still a road. You have to treat it as a road. Lines for Wild Rockies and native ecosystem also prevailed partially. Judge stopped the work on the recreation trails and older roads. Basically, that falls back to what they call the Kootenai decision.
Mr. Cornell, how much more do you have to go?
About 2 more slides.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. And so that they actually asked for an injunction. The judge didn't do it. So there's actually 4 projects within the area that is going right now. This is the loggers, and that's actually Red Mountain behind there. The flume goes around the backside of that. This is one of the harvested units. This is the fuel reduction area, and they're just going to do a prescribed fire on that this fall. And this is the final picture I want to show you. This is back to Hayman fire. And this is what the consequence of not doing any of these fuel reduction projects in the forest above your watershed. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kona. Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just would like to thank Mr. Cohenauer for the presentation here this afternoon. I consider the catastrophic wildfire to be our greatest community risk, not only to our town, but as you demonstrated clearly, to our source of water here. So I think the more awareness that can be made of this, the better. So thank you very much for sharing with us today.
Certainly.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
First, this really, really great presentation and super helpful. This is something that we haven't really got to spend a ton of time on since I've been on the commission in depth. So this was really helpful. I'm wondering, do you think that the city is doing enough, or what else do you think? I mean, do we need to be doing more?
Well, you can certainly be doing more. Brad Langsather is actually a representative on our collaborative, very intelligent guy, knows his forest work and silvicultural. You certainly can actually be doing more, maybe prompting the Forest Service to actually going more into your watershed and doing more active projects in there. And they would love to have the feedback from you guys.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? Thank you so much, Mr. Kona. We appreciate your presentation and your informative presentation.
You bet. Thank you, Mayor.
You bet. Manager Hollishaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohenauer. That was very helpful. Having been in Denver during the Hayman fire, it was pretty awful, especially I had a kiddo with asthma and a little baby. It's pretty tough when not only is your watershed in the middle of it, but also you have family who have respiratory issues. And so those are secondary impacts as well, and they do affect our community. So the awareness is very much appreciated, and I'm looking forward to sending a letter to the Forest Service if I'm directed today. I would love to also share to you, and I'm going to ask Amanda to hop into the screen here. So Amanda helped the directors and team collect all of the projects based on the working session that we held around ARPA, and pretty significant amount of information provided, which was far more by way of detail as to the proposals, and definitely think that the community is very interested in being thoughtful about how they could move the dial of these dollars. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda. She's going to go over the impact, the summary of the input from our Be Heard, and then also high-level summary, and we can talk about next steps and what your thoughts are based on what you've seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Harlow-Shaw. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So as the manager mentioned, my goal is just to give you a quick high-level overview of where we're at so far, and then review our public engagement process and what we've sort of learned from the public engagement that happened over the last couple of weeks. And then finally, I'll just give a high-level overview of the Senate bill that Commissioner O'Loughlin referenced in our last administrative meeting, and how that potentially could impact spending with ARPA. So for those that are watching the meeting but are not familiar with this, the city in total is anticipated to receive $8.4 million in ARPA funding. We received 4.2, so half of that allotment last year in June, and that was incorporated and adopted into the FY22 budget to make sure that that money was available for this fiscal year. The second allocation is anticipated to come later this spring. And the allowable, at this point, the allowable uses for those funds include responding to COVID-19, the COVID-19 public health emergency and its negative economic impacts, providing premium pay for various eligible workers, the provision of government services to the extent of reduction of revenues that were lost during the pandemic, and then investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. During the November work session, Director Danielson presented several different proposals that staff had put together for funding, and you all had requested that we come back with some additional information related to the pilot programs and new initiatives that were being proposed, so that you had a better understanding of what ongoing costs potentially would look like should those programs go beyond the pilot phase. So the pilot programs, in addition to having staff create those summary sheets, we also put those and the other initiatives that the commission had shown interest in into our Be Heard Helena platform, which is our public engagement platform. And I just wanted to give you a brief rundown of how that engagement went and what we were able to glean from that. So the information, and you should have all received in an email today, this report, but the information that we're pulling from is specific to an engagement that started on November 19th and went through last Friday, December 10th. I will say that we still have that engagement open if people want to continue to give feedback. So the report that I'm giving to you is specific to that time frame, but the opportunity to weigh in is still available. The engagement that we chose, we used our balancing act tool. So there's essentially two input places for folks to be giving feedback. You could leave a comment or an idea on the Be Heard page itself, and then embedded within the page was the balancing act tool, which is the simulation tool that you all are familiar with from our annual budget process. So we have some analytics that are connected to both of those because they do track that out. Just in general, we're really pleased with the amount of feedback that we received. As a comparison, for the FY22 annual budget, we received 300 visits to the Be Heard Helena budget page and 5 balancing act submissions over the course of 6 months. And in the last 3 weeks, we've received 336 page views to the Be Heard page and 62 submissions. So we're pleased with the ability to have that tool available, and then it seems that people are finding their way there. The general takeaways that we were able to glean from the balancing act and Be Heard submissions, the area that received the most increase in funding in that simulation was water and sewer programs. The program area that received the most decrease was housing programs. The pilot programs were in as a fixed dollar amount, so folks could check yes and submit, basically, to provide their support for that. So within the pilot programs, the Cahoots program received 24 submissions and support. The misdemeanor probation program received 8. The consolidated prosecution and victim services program had 11 submissions. And then we had some one-time investments. So these were not necessarily programs, but a one-time fixed cost. The DUI and behavioral health court feasibility study had 9 submissions and support. And then the Friendship Center victim services program had 27 submissions and support. So at this point, staff we're continuing with our recommendation that we have the 5.875 million available for eligible expenses. This is excluding the wastewater, the initial wastewater and water funds. And then we have that $700,000 in revenue loss that's available basically at your discretion for programs that the commission has any interest in. So at this point, we open this up to you in terms of the options that are in front of you. You could potentially hold off on allocating any money at this point and allocate all 8.4. So right now, what we have at our disposal is that 4.2 that we already received last June. So we could wait until the spring until we have that full 8.4 and allocate funds at that point, or the commission could choose to fund what we have available now with whatever programs or services that you are interested in. You could split the funds equally into buckets based off of your strategic outcomes. You could put it all in water and wastewater projects. So the ball is really in your court now in terms of deciding how best you want to move forward with that funding. But I'll stop there in case you have any questions. And then I'll also offer up if there are other, I don't want to go into every detail of the summary sheets that we provided to you related to the programs, but if there are specific questions that the commission is interested in or wants more information on, we can pull in our subject matter experts at the department level to try to help answer those questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Comments or questions from the commission thus far?
Mayor, I have a couple questions just on the sort of presentation of what we've received from the budgeting tool.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So Amanda, thank you for the summary. That was really helpful. And it is nice to kind of just get a sense of how folks are using the tool. I am curious, do we have a way to receive feedback on the tool itself? How folks felt about kind of the use of it, like what information might be helpful? Is there a sort of a way for folks to provide feedback like that?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. To my knowledge, with this particular engagement, we did not have a catch-all item per se related to the tool. We did have, if folks were looking for a catch-all place to put ideas about the types of things that they would have liked to have seen in there, that fell under the revenue loss category. So there was a way to capture ideas related to the funding, but not necessarily the tool. I'm not sure if our public information officer, Jake Garson, is on the line. If he is aware if there's a way that we can include a way for folks to provide feedback on the tool itself. He might be able to speak to that better as he's sort of been in the back end using the sort of the functionality part of that tool.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe just something for future effort. And then Mayor, just one more question. So my understanding is that this, the sort of information, the numbers that you're sharing relate to the budget tool in the Be Heard Helena. That does not include, say, emails that the mayor and commission may be receiving about, in support or just generally, comments about the use of ARPA funds?
That's correct. So I think what you're getting at, Commissioner Laughlin, is a challenge that we balance throughout any sort of an engagement, which is that we have multiple inputs for how we get public comment. And the mayor and commission email obviously is directed towards you all. There are staff that are aware of those emails, but they're not necessarily intended for staff to be responding to or staff to be engaging with. So those are not included in this in terms of sort of what I would call our official engagement for public information. We're looking more towards comments that are made in the commission meetings, of course, which are included in meeting minutes, and then using this tool to gauge that feedback.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Can I just add something to that before you go on, Commissioner?
Sure.
Amanda, I thought we used those comments on mayor and commissioner as part of our records, and we've used them to decide. You know, the emails we receive in mayor and commission, they've been made part of the public records. They've been made part of decision making. So, and we do have staff that are on that mayor and commissioner email.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, please.
Okay, the mayor and commission email, when it comes to public comment, those public comments are incorporated when directed, and those come through the city clerk's office. I will respond if I'm included on an email that says mayor and commission. While we may have staff within the group itself, those emails aren't intended for anyone but you all. So yes, in the case of your public meetings, I'll give you an example, West Side. The West Side is a really good example of it's a quasi-judicial process where you want to incorporate all of those public comments into that decision-making. That is absolutely the intention of pulling those out of the mayor and commission and making those all public. In this scenario, this was not is not the formal decision-making conversation. And in this scenario, there is not, because we're still in an admin meeting. We are contemplating where we could be going and seeking input, as opposed to taking official public comment for a quasi-judicial setting. So I just want to, I know it's a nerdy over analysis, but at the same time, it's in line with the new IAP2. The difficulty we have, and at some point we can talk about this too with the mayor and commission email. We have also another gap in a set of communications we've been talking about as a director team. But all of your points are very important as it relates to ensuring that input is contemplated. The final decisions are all, of course, here with you all at an actual public meeting. So the mechanic from here of how we would incorporate these, Amanda went over, which is that, we've already incorporated the 4.5 in the current budget, or excuse me, 4.2. We have another allocation pending that we still have to incorporate as new revenue. We're not actually making final decisions. We're just contemplating.
I'm aware of all of that, Madam Manager Hollishock. What I'm saying is that including those comments, because that's the way the public communicates with us when they want things done also. So those comments should be inclusive in whatever survey decision makings we're making. When we say we've included the public, we should include them. It should be inclusive.
Sure. So, Mayor, the detriment of the email, as I've experienced, is that the commission email is not available outwardly until that meeting.
and then not necessarily always contemplated by others. So I would just say that there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation about the transparency in that mayor and commission email in a different method, which is that you can't see those things as they come into the mayor and commission.
Mayor.
Go ahead,
maybe
Commissioner.
One comment. I mean, no one can see the balancing act results either, right? I mean, this is the first, we received it right before the meeting. It's not included in the meeting packet. So, you know, I mean, I think that the mayor's comment is a fair one. I simply wanted to just, I think, make, you know, for the record, we have received a number of emails in support of the housing money. And perhaps that, you know, I think that's just helpful for the public to know, given the sort of 65 people who weighed in with the balancing act. I don't know, perhaps you all have taken a number, but I think we have gotten a fair amount of emails in support of the housing. So I appreciate the comment that there are multiple routes for folks to comment. It's helpful to also reflect what we're getting as well, which I know that your office, you know, at least receives those emails. Whether or not you're responding to them, I think that's a decision for maybe the future commission to discuss. But certainly you are, I mean, I think that your office is included on those emails.
Yes, absolutely, but that those aren't to us. So absolutely, sure, we can always include them, but that does not necessarily mean when someone's writing the mayor and the commission, they're looking to talk to me. The second point I just want to reflect on is that this isn't the decision-making time. We're still in that review. So as you get into that decision-making, you should be continuing to take in all of this information. So to your point, Mayor, yeah, we would want to include whatever other comments you might have received. Now, whether or not on the housing side, to your point, Commissioner Laughlin, we can go and pull that. The problem is that, is it the decision point around the number of comments you get, or is the decision point around the study of the work and where the work is going? That's the question that often comes up with, so we've got 20 emails or 500 emails. Is that 500 emails more important than the analysis that you all do in your decision making? That's not that's not something for me to answer, but that has come up with the number of emails that come in when someone has a campaign in particular they're running on an issue. So that just to keep in mind as well.
Go ahead, Commissioner. God, I'm gonna blank on you there.
Whatever the hell it is. So since my time to opine on the process is rapidly waning, and I'm pretty happy about that. I mean, I will just say, who cares, right? The emails come in to us and they say support housing, and someone uses the balancing tool and says don't support housing, and someone stops you in the street and says, hey, Commissioner, whatever your name is, support housing. The point is, increase your contacts, right? I mean, that's what you want here with your public outreach. Figure out how to increase those contacts, and don't need to argue about whether or not. We can argue about whether or not putting out reports from the city that don't necessarily reflect the commentary of a significant portion of people who comment is an issue, right? If we consider that a problem. But my goodness, like, let's not argue about the process of whether or not the emails have come in or not. They've come in. And you as commissioners have to make that determination. I will put in one plug that we used to do, and this came up when Central School was happening. Ex parte communications were a huge problem in that case, and they are with any subdivision. And so we pushed, and the manager's office obtained some sort of license to something where when somebody commented on that specific topic, it was pushed to a comments page viewable to the entire public at that time. And what it meant was we didn't have to rely on all of those comments getting printed for the first time in a packet, being said in the commission room. The stuff that would have otherwise gone to mayor and commission went into a public repository. Others could see what those comments were. Others could, in theory, tailor their comments. People remained civil. It didn't turn into Reddit. And we wound up with a pretty robust commentary that was public facing. People could check a box of support or oppose, or you could categorize it. So looking for something like that got shut down. I don't know why it got turned off. Probably too much public comment for people, but it was a really nifty tool at the time. And put to bed a bit of the discussion of, is it a public comment? Is it not a public comment? Is it a commission comment? Is it a manager comment? Who cares? Just take the comments.
Okay. Any other comments for Ms. Opitz or the city manager?
Mr. Mayor, before we move on, I did want to provide just a brief summary on the on where Congress is at in terms of passing additional legislation that could impact these funds, if I may.
Please.
So Commissioner O'Loughlin had mentioned in our previous administration meeting, Senate Bill 3011 and House Bill 5735. So those are, it's a piece of legislation that's focused basically on providing additional flexibility to states, local governments, and tribes in terms of how they spend their state and local fiscal recovery funds. And generally speaking, and I will be brief, I understand that we've got a full agenda here. The additional latitude happens in terms of funds can be used for emergency relief and natural disasters associated with negative economic impacts. The funds can also be used for designated infrastructure projects. And there is a whole host of federal programs that those funds would be allowable to be used if they are connected, if they're eligible for any of these other programs. And again, I'll speak in generalities, but a lot of them are focused on transportation, highways, bridges. There is if a program is eligible for the carbon reduction program, that would be included as well. CDBG is also included in there. And I can give you a comprehensive list if that's something of interest, but in general, it's looking at expanding the types of infrastructure projects that would be available. The other item of note that would be included is that the time frame in which those funds could be spent would change. So currently, under the current law, it's December 31st of 2024 when those funds would need to be spent. And this bill would allow for those certain types of infrastructure projects, that funding could be extended until 2026. So that's just the 30,000 foot view. And at this point, that it passed in October through the Senate, but it has been introduced to the House, but no action has been taken beyond that. So,
thank you, Ms. Opitz. Any other comments or questions for the manager? Or go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is the manager seeking direction from us tonight?
Manager Hollishaw?
Yes, I am. I am hoping to get an understanding on where you would like to go next. So we are in the middle of a transition of the commission. It would be good for us to understand. There are some projects that we would like to say, yes, move forward, start implementing. Others, we would like to hear whether or not you're absolutely not interested in. If there is something that you are not, there's more vetting, more work that was done in this round of information to you all. There are some serious commitments here. There are also, I'm positive, more ideas out there. The drawback that we have in particular in some of these infrastructure projects is that we have to start moving now because they are hard to get moving. So for example, moving forward with the water and sewer is recommended, moving forward with the shelter, moving forward with the First Redeemers. Those kinds of projects are really timely and important because we're competing in a very small market for a small amount of contractors and small amount of materials, limited materials. So we really need to start moving those bigger infrastructure projects now.
And then the other ones, the pilot projects, it's very exciting. I know there's hesitation. We do have until that 2026 timeframe to spend these dollars. And if you make these commitments and allocations, we're ready to spend all the way through into those pilot projects. Also, know that there could be, again, more ideas out there too. So it's hard to commit. We can't make commitments, but I do need some direction. Thank you.
Well, I thought this was informational, Madam Manager Hollishaw, because that's what I understood from you today.
No, sir. No, sir. That intention and the request in the memo is, as was recommended in the memo, was to fund and move forward these projects as presented. Also, we also added alternatives to what those could be. You could choose, and Amanda went over those, on what you could choose to do and recommend we move forward with in a consent method. But this is not the decision making. The decision making still is yet to come at those final allocation meetings and incorporating them into the budget, just making sure that there's a distinction here. That also becomes I know, a difficulty with these admin meetings when we're studying an issue, and I'm seeking guidance.
Commissioner Dean.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I have one logistical question and then maybe a suggestion. My question is, since this was, Amanda noted that we include this in the federal appropriation into the FY22 budget, don't we need a resolution of intention to amend the budget, or do we not?
Yes, as I shared, so the FY22 budget included the 4.2. We also have yet to receive the balance of funds. The balance of funds will come in the spring. We have not allocated the expenses, so revenues in FY22, we still have to do the expense allocation, budget amendment. We also have to incorporate the additional dollars. So those are the mechanics of next steps of spending and incorporating. This is more conversation around what to do and what would you like to see done with those dollars when we get to those mechanism points for implementation.
Okay.
Here too, so
that's helpful. So I guess my second piece would be, I think maybe interested in, I don't know if we're going to get to a point tonight or we have necessarily some of these proposals flushed out to a good point, or to a point where we can say, yes, let's dedicate millions of dollars, to specific items. I think maybe some of them are, but I would not say all of them. So I'm wondering, would it be worthwhile if we tonight maybe get consensus on what are the buckets that we would like to, decide on some general amounts to include, and then actually start trying to get some of those other details flushed out.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'll just kick it off with my general approach to this, and I think I voiced it a little bit at our first work session, but I think, I can't support the establishment of pilot programs or new programs that will continue in perpetuity with one-time funding. I just think with any program, you should have a real clear plan and a sustainable funding source. And I think, as Commissioner Dean just pointed out, it seems like in some cases I don't really feel confident that we have that. In general, relative to some of the proposals dealing with homelessness or victim services or, other sorts of ideas, I think there are other organizations and other agencies that can deal with those, I guess, say, disadvantaged elements of our society. But there's no one else, in my opinion, that's responsible for our water and our wastewater. That's that's on us. And I think, you know, as we think back to the study that was presented to us really this spring about our water system, you know, we can say that they told us that 40% of our pipes are 50 years old. 15% were more than 75 years old. 34% of this system is undersized, which causes significant pressures and impedes fire flow. And you know, they went on to note that 16 miles of pipe in our downtown and on our west side were high to extreme risk for failure. And another 67 miles in the grid were listed at being at medium risk. So I think the point being is that there's a great deal of need that exists there. And I might also refer to our packet here tonight where in May the HCC recommended to us, you know, relative to ARPA funds, and granted this was early on, but I think it spoke well then and speaks well now. And their view was, you know, Helena is projected to receive around 8 million. State has matching grants for eligible water and wastewater projects. The city should use as much of the 8 million on necessary water and wastewater projects as possible to get the largest match from the state. And I guess that's my feeling on the direction that we should head with this one-time money. I think we're going to miss a great opportunity if we don't address the serious need that exists in our water and wastewater infrastructure. So that's generally what I'm thinking. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I very much appreciate the comments from Commissioner Logan, and I think I would share just sort of a general sentiment about trying to think about what are some one-time expenditures or one-time projects that we might want to prioritize with these one-time funds. I too have a little bit of concern about at least some of the sort of suggested pilot projects, just given kind of where we sit with the budget and how those might, might continue once the ARPA funds are expended. So my inclination, I think, would be, and my understanding is that what the city is recommending for water and sewer is the 1.8 million, which I think based off of our last meeting is sort of what was kind of initially projected for what the city could take on over the next couple years, just given capacity. I think it makes a lot of sense to allocate the 1.8 million to the water and sewer projects that have been articulated. I would also be supportive of giving direction to move forward with our redeemers and possibly consider, the full request of 2.4 million. Definitely appreciate Commissioner Logan's comments. I think I would probably diverge a little bit from the sentiment that the city maybe doesn't have a role. I think this is a major issue in our community. We continue to hear about housing instability. And I think that we have a project that is, if I look at sort of the summary for this project compared to some of the other pilot projects we got from the city, I think is well thought out, and we have pretty strong support from the community. So I think that is, my sense is it is an allowable use of funds. It is really targeting those who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And I think is certainly a worthy project for consideration. The final thing that I would just say for the homeless shelter, I think there's no question that this is something that that is a growing issue in our community. Really, really appreciate Good Samaritan stepping up to put forward this proposal. I would be supportive, and I think Commissioner Dean suggestion of sort of a bucket of allocating a portion of funds into, really kind of dedicating some resources to addressing homelessness in our community, with sort of the ask that the city staff, Good Samaritan, and other partners in the community come together and really hone in on what that looks like. I have some concerns about the components of that proposal that appears to be sort of potentially ongoing expenditures, but I think a good portion of this is really thinking through what are the one-time infrastructure costs that I think is very much a good use of ARPA dollars, and certainly something that other communities are thinking about as well. So those would be, I think, the three kind of areas that I would, be interested in hearing if there's consensus on. I think cahoots, I know we're going to hear a little bit from the chief later on in the agenda about what potentially the city's envisioning. So I leave open also the potential of thinking about how we might use some dollars there. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about what that could look like. My sense is that there are other funding streams that potentially the city could utilize into the future if that is something that the city wants to continue. But that's kind of where I'm sitting with all of this. And I would just say huge appreciation to the city for all of the work that's gone into this. I think there's some really interesting ideas here. I would love to see for the city to continue to explore some of these. But I think at this point, sort of those three buckets are kind of the areas that feel, ready to consider, at least right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Halliday. I got it right.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So when I was looking at the guidance, the most recent, I think, Treasury guidance on use of ARPA funds, and specifically on the questions of things like affordable housing, the guidance basically just says, right, if you're dealing in affordable housing, there's just a presumptive belief that COVID has had an outsized impact on individuals who are experiencing, unhousedness, critical housing shortages. And I think we can look around our community, we can see that, whether it's we know people in that situation, whether it's we can see individuals we pass on the streets, whether it's we can look at skyrocketing housing prices. And it's easy for the five of us, right? We are all persons of privilege sitting here having this meeting. But when we say things like disadvantaged elements, I think you mentioned, Commissioner Logan, right? What we're talking about is human beings in our community who are struggling to find safe, affordable, just any shelter over their heads. And I appreciate that our federal government, recognizing the use of these funds, has just presumptively said, you can spend the funds on these purposes because they are dire critical needs that have harmed people. People have been harmed in our communities. So I understand the need for our water infrastructure being a critical need. I don't think I can look at humans in our community and say that their shelter is not a critical need, if not approaching on par with some of those, because if you can't have a home, you don't get to take advantage of the new pipes. So I appreciate Commissioner O'Loughlin, Commissioner Dean's concepts of buckets. I would recommend doing that as I look at the idea that the staff have come up with. What I like is that these thought big, they thought ambitious, they thought forward, they thought long-term needs that the city has, insightful new concepts and programs possibly for the future. Now I think what the commission should do for its own good over the coming months and for the city's good is put that money into buckets, right? 1.8 for that water that we're talking about here, a certain amount into housing, specifically put some money into that Our Redeemers project, and then just put a not otherwise specified amount into further refinement of housing projects, and take some time and think about it. And once again, ask the manager to go back to the staff, just like for the production of these ideas, and once again, think big, but come up with those ideas in the area of housing now, right? Help Good Samaritan and our other organizations fully bake the idea of a homeless crisis outreach program. Or maybe it's a totally different idea that hasn't come up yet. Let's move some of these other ideas that just aren't quite ready yet, aren't in place right now, off the table to sort of take away from that bandwidth, that capacity, and instead focus in those specific areas. So, I'd be inclined, I think Commissioner Dean's right, buckets. I like Commissioner O'Loughlin's ideas, and that's how I would move it forward. I think it will help you all in refining those ideas and coming up with some really good projects. It's going to take some time. It's going to take 6 months. It's going to take 8 months. You're going to have more discussions on them, but as you refine those and move forward, you're going to give a better product overall and have a much longer term impact to critical needs in our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments? Well, for me, there are projects that one-time spending that are very important. Commissioner Logan stated it, our water and sewer, yes, our age-old water and sewer needs updating. But there are also other projects that we have to take into consideration. Over the summer, we heard enough about affordable housing. In fact, we continue to hear about affordable housing. We heard enough about homelessness. If we were put here by the people, if the people are saying, hey, look into these things, I think we should be able to look into some of those things. And while I do think we should spend some of the funding into the one-time project like water and sewer, I still think that some of the other projects are also one-time funding we need to look at. And I am of the conviction that we should look into housing. I'm of the conviction that we need to look into homelessness and our water and sewer. That's where I'm very comfortable with. And of course, we have the Cahoots program. I will listen to Chief Hagan, what he has to say about that. But yeah, that's where I'm at, Commissioner Dean.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So one thing that I should have mentioned, I do think that it would be worthwhile to, particularly on some of the infrastructure pieces, water and wastewater, figuring out how we can maybe be working with the county as well. Well, not just on that, but also on the housing piece as well. I know that they are less interested in, for example, helping do one-time funding of, a piece of property. But from what I had gathered at our last discussion on this topic, there was interest in, maybe supporting the treatment piece. And I think, that could be maybe more opportunity to actually collaborate, since these issues are not just City of Helena issues. One suggestion I'd also have, it might be worth, thinking about these buckets. In my mind, I've been thinking of 4 of them. One, the housing piece, it includes the emergency, transitional, and affordable housing. I think Commissioner Logan and Commissioner O'Loughlin both kind of explained the importance of a one-time nature in some of those pieces. The second one, infrastructure, water and wastewater. Third, community safety. And then the fourth one, economic development. I think those reflect a lot of the comments we've received as well. And maybe will give us a clearer roadmap moving forward to actually start fleshing out what these look like.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor and Commission. Thank you.
So do you have some directions on what
Yeah, I've got direction. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll summarize it all at the end too.
Well, and can I just comment maybe on Commissioner Dean's suggestion?
Please go ahead.
So I think that's a helpful one. I guess in relation to community safety, I think again we'll hear about cahoots. I know that there is also a one-time sort of needs assessment, I think, for the DOI court, which again I'm comfortable with, given that I believe that's sort of a one-time expenditure. I would say the rest of them, my inclination is to push pause on them. But I don't know, Commissioner Dean, if you were sort of thinking of all of those in that bucket, or if there were kind of specific things related to community safety, or if you had sort of in mind, like how much in that bucket.
Yeah, not necessarily all of them. I think that, I don't, well, and this is where that conversation with the county, I think, can come into. I don't feel like I really have a clear understanding of what the whole consolidated prosecution victim services program will include and how does that function? What are the ongoing costs? The misdemeanor DUI, or the misdemeanor probation program, more details on that would be helpful. I do think you're correct in the DUI assessment, that the DUI court assessment, that is a one-time cost that really is not much anyway. And I believe, I don't know if Judge Peterson is on tonight, but from what I understand, I think that this is also, that was part of the discussion in building out an additional office in the new courtroom, so that we did have the facilities to access the federal grant. And then for Friendship Center, I'm not really sure what all that includes, or if there's like a specific need that they're trying to address in that program. So I don't have a specific number. I think the DUI court for sure.
I'm not sure this is the meeting for all of this, is it? Because I thought we're not going into those kind of details for this. If I'm wrong, go ahead.
Well, I mean, Mayor, I think that we're being asked to at least give some direction, and I don't know if there is the ability to sort of give enough direction to sort of begin to move on some of these. I mean, I'm hearing the city manager say that for some of these, like, we may want to begin to move forward with them, given, trying to get contractors and getting, particularly the infrastructure projects. I like the idea of doing buckets, but I also think that I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable saying, let's create a public safety bucket and then throw all of the things that have been proposed. I think the staff have had a few months. We haven't gotten a lot of detail on those. And so I think perhaps that's a conversation that, the commission can have in the next budget cycle. But given where we sit with ARPA funds, I think we've got some other proposals in front of us that we've been given a lot more detail that seems like it's, a little bit more cooked.
Okay, Commissioner Dean, I apologize. You want to continue?
No, that I'm good.
Okay, Commissioner Halliday.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry. When I sort of indicated buckets, I look at what we've already got here in front of us, right, as buckets. We had discussions about $1.8 million on water. I see that as the water bucket, no pun intended. I look at housing, right, and I see about 5.725 million on our sheet. And I see that as the housing bucket, right? And I think that's probably a pretty good number, right? I just round that up to 6 and say, we're going housing bucket. You could talk about specific items in there, like our redeemers, which I think is a more concrete project, and say, let's go with 2.2 or 2.4 and pick a sort of number in there. And then you take the rest of that money and you say, we're not quite sure what it's there for yet, but we know that the goal is to work on another $2.6 million worth of housing, homeless, whatever solutions going forward. And now you've focused yourself. You haven't identified specific projects you have to move forward on tonight, but you've said that these are going to be priorities because you're putting, you're essentially putting $6 million towards this long-term goal, right? You're putting $2 million towards these additional water projects, which are going to have to get sussed out and developed. Simultaneously, while doing something like that, you look at your sheet and realize that there's some places where things have to come off the ledger, right? And so when I look at a program like the misdemeanor probation, which we talked about a bit last time, to me, that is the epitome of sort of what Commissioner Logan has criticized as a long-term program, right? It's not a one-time expenditure of funds. It's a pretty significant staff bureaucratic build out. That's one that I would just say, well, there's an easy 1 million. You would take off the plate tonight, you'd sweep it into your housing bucket or your water bucket at that point. And you just wouldn't have staff spend any more time on a program like that. That's sort of bandwidth and mental exercise that, as we just talked about earlier, a reduced number of staff members serving our city right now don't have time to work on. That's not garnering a majority of support. And so it's just best to triage what you can, work towards what your ultimate goals are. So I think it would be worth at least talking through some of these, because I think it's unfair to staff and the manager, and maybe you want to, punt it again to another commission, but to keep telling them to sort of work on and bring back ideas and programs that are ultimately going to build away the earth in the long run. So while I talk about buckets, right now we have, pretty general buckets. I think the managers asked for some direction narrowing it, and I think the staff deserve that as well.
Commissioner Logan.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question for the manager or the Public Works Director. It seemed like in our first work session on ARPA, I seem to recall Director Leland saying something along the lines of million handle in the next 3 to 5 years, something along those lines. Was that accurate or not? Thanks.
Sure. So I see Director Leland has hopped in. I know we as a director team also sat down and really were uncomfortable at points on some of these projects that are pilots, but they're an opportunity to talk about things that we haven't talked about before. So I think that's a win. I appreciate Commissioner Halliday, all your comments around the support to the staff in that and taking it down that road. But during that conversation with the directors, we all noted that if there was a real interest by the commission to move forward these pilot projects and they just would not move and they would just fall down, then we'd look to Ryan and dump the money into water and sewer because we knew he'd be able to spend it. So if by the end of 2024, we could not allocate these dollars, so allocate versus spend, allocate these dollars by March of 2024, we would then turn to Ryan and say, okay, Ryan, we're going to allocate them into water and sewer. All of these things, all these other projects did not move. We have to allocate and spend. That's where Ryan, but the trigger point, which I think you're pointing out, Commissioner Logan, is at what point are we at capacity of construction contractors and materials? And that's what Ryan, I really asked Ryan, what is real? What can we actually do? We have 46 million in demand, but we can't do 46 million in 6 years, or excuse me, by 2026. So what's real? So Ryan, I know there's been some more time you've had to think over what that looks like. What is that number?
Mayor, commissioners, that number is right around 13 million. I mean, give or take $1 million. And then that's why I came up with about 1.8 million in this pot A of 8.4 million, because we have $11.5 million of projects already set forward with the competitive grant one and then the direct allocation money. So that's why it sort of came to around 13 is my best guess for the next 3 years to come up with our capacity. If you do give more money and want to give me all the money, I will take and do my best to be able to spend it by the time that it's there. But 13 is the number that kind of was batted around with staff that I think that realistically we can get out the door and in the ground.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Manager Hollishock, what I've heard here today is that I think we have consensus on some money for water and sewer. We have consensus on some money for housing. We have consensus on homelessness. If I'm wrong, please let me know.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
The one that I guess two that I would just like to make sure that we have clarity. I would be very interested in money for economic development that are, one-time funds. And then also that 10,000 for the DUI court assessment.
Okay, thank you.
If I could perhaps summarize what I've heard as well, if you're comfortable, Mayor.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I feel like I heard some pretty clear support for, in consensus, my Redeemers, and moving that project forward as well, the dollars that have been identified there, as well as the homelessness project with, and working more detailed on that homeless project with the Salvation Army, Good Samaritans. I also heard movement into water and sewer, and then not consensus towards these one-time other new projects. So I just want to make sure that we're in agreement there too, because
what are the one-time other new projects you're referring to?
Like the DUI court and the EcoDevo, economic development. So I just want to make sure that those are off the table. I'm just saying out loud, those are off the table. Okay, DUI court, misdemeanors, EcoDevo, those are off the table based on the consensus here.
And I heard Commissioner Dane was saying something about a $10,000.
That's the DUI. That's a DUI court.
Is that a one-time fund?
Yes.
10,000. I don't have a problem with that, quite frankly.
And I would agree, Mr. Mayor. I think the 10,000 for DUI court makes sense there. It's a one-time feasibility study.
Yeah.
And the economic development, if we're talking about the 125,000, that's contained in the ARPA request summary, or something, right? Like it doesn't have to be that one, but just sort of tagging that. I don't think there's any problem there. I mean, what I've been saying is just sort of like, it's great if we can come to some consensus. I think it's really going to help you guys the next time you talk about this. If some of the role is winnowed, right, and that extra money is being swept into these housing and water funds, I think that will make everybody's lives easier the next time you all talk about it. But economic development, DUI court, I'm on board for those.
Yeah, it's small. So yeah, I agree with you there too. So I think we have consensus on that. Do you have any other comments or questions on this topic?
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just one clarifying. I think it is worth considering more than just the 125,000 for economic development. I think that should also include conversations with MBAC in terms of really making sure that we are supporting further development of homegrown businesses so that we can continue to grow our tax base and pay for these other services that obviously we need to continue to consider. Because I know for local businesses, it continues to get harder and harder when, giant chains can pay incredible wages. And, local shops can't get enough folks to, help make sandwiches.
Thank you. Yeah, you bet. I hear you. Manager Holshock, are you done with your presentation?
Very helpful. Thank you very much. I know that was difficult. That helps give me some direction. Thank you.
City Attorney?
I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Mayor,
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Jordan, not Commissioner Jordan, City Attorney Jordan.
we'll get there, Mayor, Commissioners. I don't have anything to report this evening.
Okay. And I know that there was a misunderstanding about item special improvement lighting district that should have been on another agenda. It was put on this agenda and noticed. So because it was noticed, at this time, I will take public comments on this because I'm sure we have people here that came on for this. So we would take public comments on the next item, special improvement lighting district, and then we'll move forward. Madam Clerk, at this time, we'll accept public comments on that topic. Do we have anybody in the waiting room?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I've given some time and I see no hands raised, and I've received no written public comment on that item.
Okay. Then we will move on. We'll move on to Police Working Group, Mental Health, New Model, Recommendations and Barriers. Manager Holshaw and Police Chief Hagan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. And really, I'll get out of the way here in a second. I just want to say thank you to Chief Hagan for the dedicated service. Obviously, he's extended his time with all of us, and this has been really to our benefit as a community. And so the police department and our team in the police department are a spectacular group, and his leadership has been phenomenal. And I want to just do a quick thank you before he goes into what was an additional report that he may not have been able to do had he not extended his time. So thank you very much, Steve and Chief Hagan.
You have the floor, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission.
Good evening.
As you're aware, the police department's been part of several working groups in our community. In September and October of this year, we did a mental health working group discussing new models, and the meetings were facilitated by Tom Cordingley, who is the chair for the Citizens Advisory Council to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. Both meetings were very well attended. Everybody that was invited did attend. We had over 30 community stakeholders with great participation. After the second meeting, the working group voted to have me give a recommendation to the commission. And so, Mayor, if you have about 2 hours, I'd like to present my recommendations. I promise I'll be fast. I'll promise I'll be faster than Joe was.
Oh, good.
So I'm just going to quickly summarize what I think, in my personal opinion and belief, is that personal and professional opinion is that we should do in the world of mental health. Let me start by saying I believe our police officers do an excellent job in working with members of this community, including those suffering from mental illness and homelessness. So despite the fact that this discussion was framed as a police reform discussion, I believe it's more appropriately a community reform discussion. For most of my career, it's been a law enforcement first and only response to people in mental health crisis or other issues involving mental illness. If a person calls the 911 center, they basically get fire, medical, or police. Those are really the only three options. And when it comes to mental health, 99% of those calls are to law enforcement or a law enforcement response. Last fall, the community moved forward with the mobile crisis response team. That was the result of a year-long process that the police department and several other stakeholders in the community were involved in. This is the first long-term addition to the mental health field response that we've had since I've been here. Put simply, it's still not enough. Even before the mental health working groups were completed, I work with the mobile crisis response team to take on a larger role and respond to mental health calls that were beyond crisis that the Helena Police Department has become involved in. These calls have included a suicide, where the survivors were counseled and worked with by mobile crisis response, people suffering from homelessness and mental illness living in our lobby at the Law and Justice Center. They've come out and talked to them. We've had issues with homeless people continually trespassing in businesses. We've called mobile crisis response to come out and work with them on those as well. Or in many cases, just the people suffering from mental illness wanting someone to talk to. So we've called mobile crisis response on them as well. I believe this is the direction we should continue to take and build on in our mental health response program as a community, not just as the police department. The police department needs help in the field. We don't need folks sitting in an office. We need people that'll actually come to where the people need services. Much of the discussion around the country has been police or mental health response. I think to be effective, this needs to be a police and mental health working together, and also working with all the other resources in our community. The expansion of this program would be sometimes a police first model. Sometimes it would be mental health first and only, and other times it would be both a joint response. And I'll cover real quickly on my thought process is on that. So a lot of times we go to a call, say a trespass, and we realize once we get there, the person is suffering from mental illness. That's a perfect time to call a mental health professional to come and assist us. There's other times when we get calls of someone talking to themselves and walking down the street. That's not a law enforcement response. That's clearly a mental health response, and the mental health professionals would be the only ones that go. And then we get the calls that are a person in mental health crisis that might be violent. Both go, and it's handled by law enforcement. Once the scene's secure, it's immediately turned over to the mental health professionals. This model is very similar to what the CAHOOTS model is out of Eugene, Oregon. So the CAHOOTS model was developed by the Eugene Police Department in 1989. So it's got a good track record, and there's good data there. The program is now run through the nonprofit clinic, Whitebird Clinic out of Eugene, and it's expanded to the communities around Eugene. My recommendation would be that we start a pilot project. And again, the discussion was ARPA funds. I don't really know where that ended up, but if that's still a possibility, I would say use ARPA funds to get that pilot project going. If not, look at other funding to start a similar program. The city, I believe, should contract with mental health professionals. I don't believe we should have bring staff on board to be city employees. In this case, my recommendation is going to be to expand the mobile crisis response team. And I have talked to the hospital and I can't pronounce his last name, John Luca, and he said that they would be interested in discussing it. So that is the direction I would recommend we look. So basically, the process would be the mental health calls would be routed through the mental health professionals once the dispatchers determine there's a need for a mental health professional. You would need case managers, because that's one of the huge issues is even if we deal with someone in mental health crisis, they go to St. Peter's Hospital, they get evaluated, they get released, we deal with them again and again and again, and without anyone to refer them to. So case managers would be critically important in this process. And again, like I said earlier, we need mental health professionals that will respond to the scene. And again, like I said, mental health or the mobile crisis response team may be the best avenue to implement the recommendations in Helena. So expanding their program rather than creating a new one would be a better utilization of the resources that we have and better outcome for the mental health consumers. The biggest barrier, of course, in this program is going to be the financial side of it. Like I said, there has been discussion and an ARPA request for a $500,000 HOOTS pilot program. I won't go into detail about what would happen after that, but there's been a great deal of discussion both locally and nationally about funding this type of program by cutting police positions and moving those resources towards mental health. The concern with that concept in Helena is the police department's mental health calls have increased drastically since 2001. In addition, the calls for service, caseload, and publicly generated calls have increased, while officer initiated calls have drastically decreased. The population of Helena, Lewis and Clark County, Jefferson County, and Broadwater have also substantially increased. However, we have the same number of officers in October of 2021 as we had in 2001. So despite the increase in workload, both as a result of more mental health calls and increase in the area's population, the size of the department has remained relatively constant. The Helena Police Department's strength in the community has been working with the community to help them solve problems. So if we are able to implement a mental health program in the community, that would free up our officers to work more with the community to help solve problems rather than just respond to them. Another barrier we face would be the staffing in the 911 center. They would have to screen the calls before determining who goes to those calls. So now instead of 3 resources, we would have 4. And as we've discussed before, the 911 staffing is below what we are authorized. Not only would we need to bring it up to authorized staff, but we would probably need to increase by several positions. The funding for the 911 center is not paid for by the city. It is funded through the community, through the public safety mill levy. So that responsibility for funding would not fall on the city of Helena. If there's a decision to move forward with the project, I believe that it should be run by a mental health task force, a small group. As we learned, large groups are very hard to wield. We had our mental health working group was 30 people, and everybody has great ideas and everybody wants to bring those ideas forward, but it's just too much. So a small group, maybe 7 or less, to determine what those best practices are for Helena and the implementation of that program. In addition, we're going to need to analyze whether or not that's the best model for Helena and make adjustments. So I think that would be what that group would recommend. So that is my thoughts on what we should do. A couple of the alternatives to consider is what some communities have had is a mental health response team within the police department. The team would be specifically trained officers, mental health professionals, case managers, and peer counselors. That would require additional funding in the police department to cover costs of the program. And then the third alternative is to do nothing and continue with the current model of a law enforcement first and mostly for the mental health response. So I guess in summary, what I'm recommending is a mental health program that incorporates law enforcement and mental health professionals to do a much better job than what we're doing. Like I said, I believe our officers do a great job in this role, but I don't think we're the best folks to do this. I think it's like going to a dentist to work on some other part of your body. They're experts at dentistry, but they're not going to be an expert at other types of your body. And I think that's probably the easiest analogy. Law enforcement can work this, can do this, but it's not the best way to provide services. So thank you, Mayor, for the time, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Chief. Comments or questions from the commission? And after this comment session, I want to go back to the ARPA funding. I don't think we took public comments. And so I will encourage public comments after this section. Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you very much, Chief Hagan, for the presentation here this evening and for your participation in all of the working groups dealing with police reform or looking into police department procedure and policy. I think you've done a great job in really informing us and the community the role of the PD in the city and in our community. I think I would encourage folks. It's widely available on. I think the city has a YouTube page with these mental health working groups posted on them. I really appreciated the insight that was brought by Judge Minahan in terms of his experience over the past 2 decades in dealing with really crisis response, not only from his level, but others, the street level. And excuse me. And one of the things that he pointed out was 2 decades ago, the city and county began training and working toward, crisis intervention. And so there's a lot of work that has been going on and is going on and is, I think, being incorporated into what Chief Hagan said. But I think one of the points that Judge Minahan made was he was perplexed was the word he continued to use, that we are seemingly moving forward kind of independently. So I think it's important as we move forward to be in concert with, and we are to a degree, but make sure that we're working with those resources within the county as well, and not operating independently, because it's clearly a community effort. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dean.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First, just many thanks to the chief. Just during the pandemic and all of the times that you've stepped in as our acting city manager in the midst of all of these reform groups and everything else, I'm just super grateful for your service. We'll have more to say at the next meeting, but just want to start off with that. One thing I did want to ask is, with the, say, Cahoots pilot program, I guess to clarify your recommendation, would you recommend that, we look at a pilot program while also expanding the mobile crisis response team? Or are you envisioning, if we move forward with a pilot program, that coordinating with the mobile crisis response team? Or is the mobile crisis response team an opportunity to expand their type of services?
I believe that this is an opportunity to expand their type of services.
Okay.
I think that adding additional mental health professionals to that program would allow them not only to respond to the crisis, but respond to situations that they've already started responding to. So I think if we have that group respond to more calls, we're going to need more staff in there. I think they do a great job of handling the crisis, and they've added those additional services without an additional burden. But I think if we continue to add additional burden to them, they're going to need additional staff. So I think it's just expanding MCRT. I don't believe we have a totally separate program. I think they would work, they would conflict with each other rather than work in conjunction with each other.
Okay, that's helpful. And then I guess my other question too, towards the end of our packet, it included, we have quite a few vacancies and more coming. And I guess I'm curious, since we're only going to get a couple more chances to pick your brain during meetings, by expanding something like this, do you think that helps our recruitment efforts, or do you think we need to be focusing on other pieces so that we actually can meet, the demand that exists if we are able to supplement the mental health piece?
I don't think that will help with retention or recruitment. What I think it will help with is us to better serve the community. So earlier we had a discussion about homelessness on Billings Avenue and why the police weren't there more often, or when we've had community members talk about the homelessness downtown. If they see an officer working in that area, I think they're less likely to think that nothing's being done. In the years past, we've had 2 officers on bikes downtown. That's something we can do if we have fewer calls to respond to, is be more present in the community rather than just respond to calls. Work with the community to find solutions, and work with, if there is a shelter, an additional shelter, work with Good Samaritan, work with God's Love, work with everyone, and be part of the community rather than just a response to problems. Try to solve some of those problems. So that's what I think would be. And yeah, I don't think it would help with retention and recruitment.
What do you think would help with that piece?
I think that there's a much bigger discussion. A lot of the people, including myself, have really reflected on what's important in their lives. And with a lot of the officers that have left, the discussion has been closer to family. And with the exception of, I think, one person, the people that are all leaving weren't originally from Montana. And I mean, I've been here 35 years and I'm thinking about moving closer to family. So that's a draw right now. And I think we've seen that in a lot of respects due to COVID. People are really reflecting on their life. So I don't know if you can just say, okay, this or that's going to fix it. I think it's a much bigger discussion than one item.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, that's helpful. Yeah. And I mean, in a lot of professions, homegrown, recruitment is what is the most, provides the most long-term stability. So, I mean, I guess that is something that we need to be thinking more specifically about. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief Hagan. Really appreciate the overview and all of the work as well. I think it is definitely fair to say that there was a diverse views within the working group. And I think that, one of the things that I think bubbled up is just really kind of understanding what the mobile crisis unit is responding to, what their capacity is. And then I think you're absolutely right of not duplicating efforts, but really what can the city do to really support it. So I think that this is an interesting concept. I did have just one question for you. As a pilot, and then really giving sort of the opportunity to sort of assess, is it working? In your mind, if you were to look back, from a year from now, what in your mind would be helpful measurements of, is this pilot working in the way that maybe we want it to?
Merit Commission, I think that the number one thing that would be, are we dealing with the same people over and over again, or are we actually making an impact? I don't think numbers indicate you're making an impact. And if we, let's say they respond to 1,000 calls in a year, if that isn't cutting down on the amount of time you deal with the same people, I don't think it's a success. I think you've got to get case managers involved and get the help they need, rather than day in and day out working with the same people in the same area and the same problems. Actually coming up with a solution for folks so they have some better mental health treatment, rather than just, okay, somebody else is now working with them. I think if they're working with them and working correctly, the biggest success would be the number of times you deal with the same people. On that same note, there is a current project going through the hospital. I don't know how many of you know that, the FUSE program. It's talking about the high utilizers of both hospital services and law enforcement, 911, medical, all of those things. And we all deal with and work with the same folks over and over again. And there are many reasons for that. mental illness, addiction, housing, all of those things are all tied together. And I think if all the groups work together, I think that could actually make an impact. But again, how many times are we as a community working with the same individuals over and over would be my measure of success.
Great. That's really helpful. And Mayor, I just have maybe one more question.
Go ahead.
So at our last meeting, and we really kind of just briefly talked about what this could look like. I think there was a similar question about sort of how this fits in with what the county is doing, what the hospital is doing. I think you sort of mentioned the concept of reaching people before they're in crisis. And I'm just curious, do you anticipate that helping to build out the capacity of the mobile crisis unit could potentially reach folks before they're in full on crisis, or are we still sort of talking about those who are in crisis in the moment?
No, I am talking about those folks that are before crisis.
Okay.
I'll just give you an example. We have a gentleman that's homeless, is living in the north end of town, and we repeatedly have dealt with this individual and trespassing in businesses, and officers have worked with him on a daily basis. We've worked with street outreach. We've worked with mobile crisis response, but there's no case managers involved. And eventually that person reached crisis and ended up in the jail because of the crisis it was a criminal act. And that is a failure, I think, in the system. So I think it's well before if we get a person the mental health assistance they need early, we may be able to reduce the number of people in crisis.
That's great. Thank you. And Mayor, maybe just one comment, and I alluded to this during the ARPA discussion. I share Commissioner Logan's sort of general concern about thinking through what are one-time expenditures versus sort of what might be ongoing. I think for me, this one is a little unique, just given how much we continue to hear about this issue. I think that the city could certainly be a partner. I also, I think early on, said to the city manager and staff, let's think about what are other funding streams out there. So not just think of ARPA as just one time only and that's it, but what are other potential funding streams? No guarantee with what ultimately Congress does with Build Back Better, which they're considering right now. But my sense is that there is some potential funding streams included in that package that could be used after ARPA. So for me, I think that this is an important investment for the community to think about. And I do think that there are other funding opportunities, above and beyond ARPA once we get to that point. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do you have any other comments? Yeah, I would. I don't know about the amount, but I will also look into the CAHOOTS program. I will also put that on. I'm interested in it. So we'll move back to the ARPA funding public comments. Madam Clerk, do we have any raised hands for public comments?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I do have one hand raised, Jennifer Gursky, but I do believe her hand was raised at the beginning of this item. So I will give Ms.
Okay. Yeah, we can discuss. We can receive public comments on both. So yeah, if her hand's raised, let's go for it.
Hi, Mayor and Commission. I am Jennifer Gursky. I'm the Executive director of YWCA. And I actually have public comment for both sections. So I'll start with ARPA. As you are probably aware, YWCA is part of the working group to address full continuum housing availability out at our Redeemer's Lutheran Church. That conversation sounded like it's going to take a minute more to resolve. So I'm just going to put out that that I do think that it's important to look at all of the avenues where people do public commenting. I was unaware, I have not made a public comment on the Be Heard, but I also wasn't aware of it until a couple of days ago when a colleague of mine shared. It is good to hear that other avenues are going to be considered. And so let me use this avenue. We are in a crunch and it is only going to get worse. YWCA at this point is planning for present needs. Our future needs far exceeds what we would be able to budgetarily accomplish. We are planning a 20 unit out there. We're still through the feasibility studies, but that's what we need right now. That's not what we're going to need in 5 years. That is not a great thing that I want to share with you. I want to be an executive director that plans for our future and is able to provide for our future. But we are far behind the curve in providing shelter to those who are unhoused, transitional housing for some of the folks that Chief Hagan were talking about, like that need case management, that need stabilization. We are far behind the curve in subsidized housing. If you look at Helena Housing and the vouchers that we have available, a lot of the women that we are serving at YWCA are 12 months plus on a wait list just for a 1-bedroom apartment. And we are far beyond the curve in rental availability, housing vacancy, and affordable home ownership. That is a full spectrum of housing needs. And a lot of those can be subsidized one time. But those are just going to meet current needs if we use ARPA funds for the housing needs that we see right now. Some of the projects that you have before you are just a drop in it for Helena's current needs. And so while I don't want to be the voice of dismal and distress, I do want to create a reality. And I appreciate, I don't remember which commissioner, maybe it was Commissioner Halliday, that spoke of the privilege that a lot of us that engage in local decision making and the power that we have in our positions, we don't hear the folks that are struggling just to get into a 1-bedroom apartment. But those are the voices I hear every day. So I stand here and represent those voices that are saying it's very difficult to find something. I right now have a peer support looking for housing. She has 2 teenage sons. Her budget on 15, let's see, she makes $16 to $18 an hour, but her housing budget is $1,600 a month. That's what she's trying to find right now for a 2-bedroom place. That's our reality. So let me pivot into the Cahoots program. It sounded like I could use, we are using this time for both. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, and can you wrap it up, please?
Yeah, do I get a second time? Do I get to talk about the Cahoots?
You can go ahead now, but speed it up, please.
You bet. I was part of the work group that Chief Hagan commented on. I am also a member of the CAC that feeds into the CJCC, although I am not representing that committee. And I am formally representing YWCA tonight in this comment. I would strongly encourage that this body look into the Cahoots program. When Chief Hagan represented it at our working group last time, I went in and researched and looked at Eugene, Oregon, and looked at the 1989 startup. All of our existing programs right now that serve our community started as a pilot. I will also tell you that our community just received 2 years of funding, $9 million between 2 mental health agencies in our community that is for crisis response. And that was from the federal agency of SAMHSA. If we can start piloting, we can leverage that money and we can get into other funding streams. My recommendation would be to budget for somebody to actually find the money, not just clinicians, not just case managers, but hire a grants manager and somebody to find the money to turn it into a 5+ year pilot. Lastly, my experience in that mental health work group was an experience where a lot of our community leaders, and God bless them, said, but we've done better than in our past, or but we're doing so well now. And I think that that's to be commended, but it cannot truncate our progress for tomorrow and how we intervene and serve our neighbors in crisis. So I would encourage you to really put your toe in that deep end of the water and look into the Cahoots program. That's all, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any other raised hands?
Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, I see no other hands raised at this time. I have no written public comment on either item.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Ask Commissioner if that for the comments for the delay. Okay. Is there anyone from the public wishes to address the commission on anything? Madam Clerk.
Again, Mr. Mayor, I see no hands raised, and at this time, I have no general public comment.
Thank you. Madam Manager Halshaw, you have your directions.
Yes, Mayor, I need to confirm with you all the commission is not taking part in the stipend along with the directors. Just want to make sure that Connect and that the electeds are not.
Oh.
I had not, yeah, okay, good.
No, I'm joking.
I'm certainly in agreement.
Okay, great, thank you. I also, so to that point, I'll finish the ARPA conversation. I heard clearly that I'm going to begin the steps to move forward the My Redeemers project, move forward the water and sewer project. Also that we have buckets within water and housing, and that we have whatever's left will go into a sweep that will then evaluate on a case-by-case basis and do more work on. Is there any concern about those assumptions? I think I got out of that summary of a great conversation. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
I just might give, I think that I don't necessarily want to close the door on potential other projects, similar to what the chief has mentioned, but I also think that we really do need to have a larger conversation with the county on a few of these items. They do have money available too, and I think that there is opportunity. So I'm hoping this isn't closing the door on some of these other conversations, but really getting some more detail on some of these other projects, I think should move forward.
Thank you.
Well, and if it's helpful just to give direction today to say what can we say, let's put, dedicate 500,000, which I think is what was articulated here, into the public safety bucket for further conversations with the county on what that could look like. I think it would be helpful to also sort of map out what are other funding streams, but I think Ms. Gursky is absolutely right. Like, we starting it as an important step and then leveraging that for other funding streams into the future. So I just see if there's consensus, right? I think Commissioner Dean, you had the 4 buckets that I would say, can we put the $500,000 into the public safety bucket in addition to the 10,000 for the needs assessment for further conversations?
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Very helpful. Great, thank you, Mayor. And we'll continue to make the Cahoots-ish idea and bring them forward for next steps. Thank you, Mayor and Commission.
Any final comments from the commission? At this time, the meeting is adjourned.